Hi, friends. I'm Father Kerry Walters, pastor of Holy Spirit American National Catholic Church, and this is another Holy Spirit moment. This one on an intriguing line from a Russian novel. The novel that I'm talking about is The Brothers Karamazov. It is the masterpiece of Fyodor Dostoevsky. And the line that I would like to reflect on today with you is one that I will bet all of you are well familiar with. But before I tell you what the line is, let me set the stage for it. One of the Karamazov brothers, by the name of Dmitri, has been falsely accused of murdering the Karamazov father, and he is languishing in jail awaiting exile as punishment for his crime. He has been visited pretty regularly by a seminarian named Ratikin. Now, Ratikin actually reminds me a great deal of the seminarian in Ingmar Bergman's wonderful movie, The Seventh Seal. Ratikin, just like Bergman's seminarian, is a cynic. He seems to have ceased really believing in God, and he's done so because he believes that the existence of God somehow stymies his freedom. And so now he is a prophet, if you will, of doing everything that you want to do because there is no God to oversee you. There is no policeman God in the sky who is going to punish you for doing what it is that you wish. Dmitri has been increasingly confused by this new way of thinking about God or the non-existence of God that Ratikin has been feeding him. Alyosha, the youngest of the Karamazov brothers, a figure who is Christ-like and innocent, he's reminiscent of the character Prince Mishkin in another of Dostoevsky's novels, The Idiot. Alyosha comes to visit Dmitri, and Dmitri, in a rather confused and disjointed way, tries to explain to Alyosha what Ratikin has been telling him. And at one point, he says this to Alyosha, and he says it in a kind of questioning, bewildered way. Without God in the future life, he says, it means everything is permitted now? One can do anything? This is, by the way, in part 4, book 11, chapter 4 of The Brothers Karamazov. Now, that line has been debated ever since the novel appeared by atheists and theists alike. Atheists tend to love Dostoevsky's observation because they tend to think of religion in general and Christianity in particular as a dour naysaying to the world, a way of thought which is prudish and superstitious, and which we would all be better off without because its superstition and its prudery inhibit us. Theists, on the other hand, have approved of the line because they sense that without God, the moral doors would be thrown wide open and ethical chaos would reign. There would be no foundation, no objective and everlasting foundation for determining what's good and what's evil. We would instead be sunk in a morass of moral relativism. And regardless of whether one believes in God or not, moral relativism is a horribly inadequate model by which to measure the morality of one's life. I get both of these sides. I understand with the atheist that Christianity has indeed at times been a dour naysayer to the innocent pleasures of life. And I also get what the theists want to say, that if God is dead and everything is permitted, then we devolve into a world of each against all. But I think that there's another way to look at Dostoevsky's fascinating line, because I think that there's something much, much worse than everything being permitted if God doesn't exist, or everything being permitted if God is dead. And I would put it like this. If there is no God, if God is dead, it's not the case that everything is permitted. On the contrary, nothing is permitted. Absolutely nothing. And if atheists believe that the existence of a God somehow stymies their liberty of action, you better believe that with the absence of a God, liberty would be totally stymied. Now, let me explain what I mean by that in two different ways. One way is sort of a logical argument, and the other way is an existential one. First, the logical argument. The very word permitted presupposes the ability to choose. I'm permitted to do A or B, and I'm free to choose A or B. Or I'm permitted to do A and not permitted to do B, but I'm free to choose if I'll go against or go with what's permitted. In other words, permission requires that human beings have free will, that human beings are able to freely choose. But if there is no God, if there is no being who set in motion the physical realm, but who is not himself physical, then you and I are nothing more than the products of cosmic evolution. And like everything else that exists in the universe, we are utterly and irremediably bound by deterministic laws. We are nothing more than objects in the universe. Granted, sophisticated objects, intriguing objects, sometimes wonderful objects, but objects nonetheless. We do not have free will. And if that's the case, then talk about something being permitted or not permitted is beside the point, because we are closed in upon ourselves in radical determinism. That's the logical argument. The more existential, gut-wrenching argument goes something like this. If God does not exist, and if we still perform actions that our hearts and our minds tell us are at times reprehensible and wicked, how will we ever be forgiven for what we've done? How will we ever manage to get the burden of our guilt off of our shoulders? Only God can do that for us, so at least the tradition says. But if God doesn't exist, there is no forgiver, and there is no atonement, and there is no ability to grow into full personhood. And that's a horrible, horrible fate. So I would suggest to you once again that if God doesn't exist, nothing is permitted, because none of us would take the chance of adding even more guilt, even more sin upon our shoulders. We would stymie our own actions as if we were radically determined. Now, no less than perhaps the West's most famous atheist recognized that this was a very real possibility. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher, in a book entitled The Gay Science, spelled this all out. It's in aphorism 125, if you care to read it for yourself. And it's the well-known story of the madman. So here it is. One day at high noon, a man, the madman, walks through a crowded marketplace holding a lit lantern. And when people begin to laugh at him and say, "Why in the world do you need the lantern? It's daylight." He says, "I'm searching for God." Well, that makes them even more amused. And they begin to mock him. What, has God gotten lost? Or have you mislaid God? Is God on a holiday such that you need to search for him? And eventually the madman becomes so enraged at this mockery that he lifts the lantern high, he dashes it to the ground, extinguishing the light, and then he responds to the people in the marketplace. And he says to them, "Where is God? I'll tell you where God is. He's dead. You and I have killed God. We have killed God through our indifference. We have killed God through our mockery. We have slain that being that is necessary for forgiveness. And in doing so, we've created the greatest of crimes. We are the murderers of murderers because we have slain the source of forgiveness. Who will forgive us this crime? We've slain the only thing that can forgive. So must we become gods ourselves to forgive one another? But we just don't have the juice to do that. We don't have the authority, as God has the authority, to forgive and to reconcile, to lift burdens of guilt off of shoulders, and to entice human beings into full humanhood. So even Nietzsche, who prided himself on being the hammer of the gods, on being the Antichrist, at least he prided himself in his latter years, even Nietzsche himself recognized that if God doesn't exist, It's not the case that everything is permitted. It's the case that nothing is permitted, because nothing that we do can be forgiven. And if nothing we can do can be forgiven, the burden of guilt will pile up increasingly on our shoulders, leading us either to despair or to a horrible, give a damn kind of cynicism in which we truly do run amok. If God is dead, if there is no God, it is not the case that everything is permitted, or at least that's not the worst consequence of the non-existence of God. What's much worse is that nothing will be permitted. I'm Father Kerry Waters, and this has been another Holy Spirit moment. Thank you, and I will see you next time.